Yesterday I made a video. It's called EOD WMD, and for those of you who don't understand, it's talks about some of the precautions and some of the techniques for disarming gun type and implosion type nuclear weapons. I talk about some of the health physics considerations, environmental considerations. One of the things I don't think I explained well enough was how you create a pit for a nuclear weapon that you're going to destroy. And you don't have the ability to basically drill a hole into the weapon and disarm it somehow, or use like a robot to disarm it. You're dealing with something that is sealed. It's sealed in case-hardened steel. I'm going to post some pictures from Kim Jong-un and his nuclear weapons, and you'll see it's a bunch of steel, and it's all welded together and fitted together to where you can't just get a socket set and some drivers and pull it apart, right? It's like a safe, right? You can't go to the Walmart or your supermarket and open the thing and take the money out. In the safe, it's easier to get in and out of, right? Because somebody has to access the money. Somebody has to deposit the money, access it, and put it in the Brinks Loomis trucks or whatever, right? So Loomis, Fargo, Brinks, whatever it is. So those safes are accessible. The vault in a bank is accessible during certain times. The vault that you put a weapon in is not necessarily accessible in the same way. If you notice, like if you watch, there's a video you can get on Netflix about a nuclear incident near Little Rock, Arkansas, in a missile silo, and they talk about several incidents, and they explain that incident in pretty good detail. And one of the things they talk about is these gases inside the silo, right? And they seem to indicate that those gases are being discharged by the rocket because it was accidentally punctured. One thing I know from, not from nuclear weapons, but from CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear work that I did, is that chemical weapons are stored in a binary form. That means that they have an agent and another activating agent that have to combine inside the weapon for them to become that dangerous, insidious form that can cause central nervous attack in like a nerve agent or something like that. And they're I want to say they're completely innocuous, but they're not as harmful in the form that they're in a artillery shell. What happens in artillery is you load the weapon into the gun, and then the gun fires that thing down range at a high velocity, and it spins, right? And artillery officers, they have their crew set the fuse to blow up at a certain distance, right? Based on a certain time of going through the air and spinning. They know the trajectory equation and the initial velocity and the altitude of the gun. You can figure out where they need it to blow up, right? There's a fuse, right? So it's going through the air and it's spinning real fast, right? There's a lot of which spinning does what? It's going like that, like a wash machine, and that creates what? Centrifugal forces and centripetal forces, right? It torques that thing around. And the rifling in the tube of the artillery shells, I guess. I don't know design artillery shells, but it torques it so that it spins as it leaves the artillery shell, and it continues to spin in whatever direction that rifling is. And so it creates centrifugal forces, which throw the agents inside of it towards the outer walls, right? And it's basically like a centrifuge. And then those things mix, and they mix and mix and mix, and after a while it becomes that dangerous, harmful, dangerous agent that you need to use for chemical attack, or not that we need to use, but that people thought we needed to use. And obviously there's better options on the battlefield today. But that is how it works. It's basically artillery shell is used as a centrifuge to spin those things out and combine them. It's like a blender. I don't know, maybe a centrifuge isn't the right way to describe it, but it's a blender. It mixes up your smoothie, and when you get hit with it, it attacks your central nervous system. And what does it do? Well, nerve agents, they paralyze you. Is kind of what they do. They make your muscles, voluntary and involuntary muscles, things like your diaphragm, and diaphragm is what? It's going to contract and relax to expand and collapse your lungs. So it's going to contract and contract and contract along with all your other muscles. You're not going to be able to breathe, right? Because what? Because your diaphragm can't relax to exhale or whatever it has to do. I'm not a doctor. I don't know exactly how that works, but I know that that's one of the things that it's going to attack, along with other internal organs, and like your heart. And you're going to have some problems because you're not going to have circulation, you're not going to have air, and you're not going to last long in that state. So they give soldiers atropine, and when that thing flies through there and blows up, they start pumping those atropine auto-injectors into their leg. If you're going to go to Harvard Medical School and you need to design something, or you want to go to chemistry school, you know, get a PhD in chemistry, you need to think about those soldiers. And if you got some spare time or something, you need to think about the soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, and what you could do for them. Because everyone knows there's conventional weapons, there's nuclear weapons, and then there's the poor man's nuclear weapon. Poor man's nuclear weapon is things like that, chemical weapons. But there's also things like cyber warfare. They can shut down the electricity grid in this country. And you can go on YouTube and look for those doomsday videos about what would happen if an EMP hit. An EMP is electromagnetic pulse. All the machines would stop working. All these things with circuits and batteries and the power supplies and the grid, it'd be down. And we'd need to rely on gas and oil to run some old vehicles, and we'd have to replace some parts, and we could pop parts out of the ground somewhere that are being stored in strategic locations around the country, hopefully, to bring everything back up that we can get back up, like tractor trailers and trains and things that need to deliver the food and oil and stuff. You know, food, oil, and water are the basic necessities, right? As people like sustainable agriculture, it's not a bad idea to have a farm close by, or some you know, some food products that are from your local community, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen on the other side of the country and how well prepared they are in California or New York or something. And those are big, they got a lot of population, a lot of people, and you think they want to send something out to some little town in the middle of Mississippi or Alabama or Tennessee or something. They say, fuck them people, let's keep this shit here. We got 20 million people in the metropolitan statistical area of New York. That's Newark and New York. That's that whole area is about 20 million people. 12 million in New York, yeah, I know the numbers. It's called an MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. But the reason I bring it up is chemical weapons right now is pretty much incinerating, or we're neutralizing most of them, right? People say, well, it's so dangerous to incinerate them, you know. But the thing they didn't quite understand, if they didn't study enough chemistry and have the right explanation, is those weapons are not combined in a way that they go chemical, you know what I mean? And you have to understand what the effect of heat is on the weapon, and what you're going to do before you incinerate it. Before, you know, how you prepare it for incineration, it could be perfectly safe. You know what I'm saying? But there's a lot of environmentalists in those towns like Anniston, Pueblo, Umatilla in Oregon, Pueblo in Colorado, Anniston in Alabama, there's alarmist people who didn't have enough chemistry or physics in college and didn't understand the explanation they were given, or didn't ask the right questions because they didn't know how an artillery shell worked, and at least a chemical artillery shell. And the thing is, they're out in Anderson, they tell you, you know, they weren't too worried really, because the artillery shells is old and leaking, but they hadn't combined, right? And the quantities that they could combine in very small in a leak or something, you know. Some will be in a liquid form, not in a gaseous form, and it needs to start spinning and like agitating a lot to get to that state where it's in a chemical agent form, in the nerve agent form, not just the two chemical reagents, right? And one of the things I know about security, and you can look at a lot of open source information and derive all of what I'm saying. So watch that video from YouTube. I don't know what it's called. It's about an incident in Little Rock, Arkansas. About I'll try to find the link where this where they had an incident in a silo, and actually there were gases. Some guy dropped a wrench. It poked a hole in the missile, and the warhead blew. The missile blew up, and the warhead popped out of the silo, and they found it a half a mile away or something in a ditch. And so the warhead didn't go off, right? And that's kind of something that would help you understand, you know, what I told you before about this thing is they sealed up pretty tight. They showed a picture of it or whatever. I don't know if it's actually real pictures. Sometimes they do a little dramatization just to entertain the public, but they don't always show you a diagram exactly how something works or what it's actually doing, you know. Because like when they had the trial that those guys in the 50s that stole the nuclear weapon designs, they put these crude designs up there. And the reason they didn't put like a functional model and a working design and thorough explanations is there's some counterintelligence issues, and they could explain it to the judge in chambers in private that this is how it works, this is exactly what he said, and we're going to fictionalize this for the public because we don't need this out there. It's a national security issue, and we're going to exercise our judgment and not declassify it. But these people actually do need to be in prison. They're dangerous proliferators. If you watch a 60 Minutes story, they want to clear these people's names and stuff. There's a story about those spies from the 50s, the Rosenbergs and all that. And they say, well, they wasn't such bad people or whatever. Well, okay, yeah, but that's based on the facts that they presented at the trial and to the media, which was a little bit cooked up because it wasn't real. It wasn't real because they didn't want people who could steal the materials or something to build one of those things based on something that someone could learn or glean from a trial. Okay? And the thing I'll tell you, and the reason I mentioned chemical weapons and nuclear weapons and storage and security and this bomb warhead coming out of the silo and everything is out there at the Anderson. Those weapons, there's always talking about some kind of leak out there. The thing is, they store them weapons in a gas. They don't want you to break in and load up your pickup truck with warheads, right, or artillery shells or something, right? So they put those storage facilities under a lot of security and observation, a lot of counterintelligence in that town and everything. But they also put gas out there in the igloo. They're called igloos. And they put the gas out there, and the gas leaks sometimes. And the gas is not a nerve agent. It's not a blister agent. It's not mustard gas. It's like a sleeping agent or something that'll fuck you up a little bit. Maybe like tear gas kind of, but also have some sedative qualities, right? That'll put you down on the ground a little while, and they come in and pick you up and take you in for interrogation. And over in those nuclear warhead silos, it's a little different. They'll kill your ass in one of those if you try to break in. You can look out there at Wyoming, North Dakota, and out there in F.E. Whiteman and Minot and all them bases up there at Warren. people's like, how in heck can you have all them nuclear silos out in the middle of nowhere with no SPs around, and those guys are just down in the ground and nobody ever broke into one? For the whole Cold War, those guys they call it a drill. They go up there and they sit in a silo for 24 hours or something, 48 hours, whatever they need to do. Yeah, if they got to pull some extra duty, they're going to stay there longer. But generally, they don't want them in there too long because they want them to be able to punch buttons and not make mistakes. And so they go up there and they got a maintenance crew, right? And the maintenance crew is not the same as the warhead arming crew, you know, the ones that launch the thing and arm it and target it and everything. The ones who take the message in from STRATCOM, the Strategic Command, and then they arm the thing. It used to be called SAC, right? Strategic Air Command. That's all the SAC bombers and missiles and submarines and stuff. Well, the submarines is Navy, but that was all an Air Force thing with SAC. And now they got this thing called STRATCOM that's got all our strategic nuclear forces under it. And it's an important command, and those people are still real important. We lost a lot of relevance the other day when the Russians tested their Zircon and proved that they had the capabilities that supposedly they, according to open source, they said they tested a hypersonic missile 6,000 something miles an hour. It could hit pretty fast and go anywhere it needs to go, and there's no kind of way to defend against hypersonic cruise missiles. Like the Tomahawk is almost impossible to shoot down, like it travels over the sea or the land. Hypersonic speeds, it's impossible. You won't even see that thing on radar. So anyways, what I was saying is this silo down in Little Rock is, they didn't really explain it too well, but they have to have a PCV suit. It's not a PVC. PVC is that pipe, right? But they have to have some kind of special suit to go in there because there's gases in the silo, not where the guy's working and punching keys and launching the thing. But when they go and do maintenance, they got to have a crew in there with the right kind of suit. It's not mop gear or something like that. Mop gear is a charcoal suit, which is mission-oriented protective posture for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. But it only protects you so much, as well as this mask. You know, what it is about a mask is masks have filters, right? And those filters can filter particulate matter down to so big a diameter, right? And if it's 1 inch, then everything that's this big will be blocked, right? Everything less than it is going to go through, right? So it's a smaller atomic diameter, right? And a lot of times they measure that in not atomic, but in molecular diameter or something. How big the molecule of gas is that can go through that mask, right? And they measure atoms and angstroms, and that particulate matter they measured sometimes in like microns or something, which are millionths of a meter, right? Like a centimeter is hundredths, a millimeter is a thousandth of a meter, a micron is a millionth of a meter. So this is pretty small molecule, I guess. I don't know, you can compare it to different things. You could think of it like, how many of those molecules would you need to fill the Dallas Cowboys stadium? Those are the kind of ways you put it into perspective in a college chemistry class. And you can figure that out. You look at the diameter and the length and the height and stuff, and figure out how many moles of that stuff you'd need. But the way you got to look at it, what really matters to a CBRN officer in the Army or the Marines is how wide how wide is it, you know, how wide is the routes of entry into that filter. So like, what will it protect against? And the gases they use in those nuclear weapon silos, they're they'll penetrate any of those CBRN suits. And why is that? Well, you don't want your chemical forces to go out there and take over your nuclear forces, right? It's a measure of control. So nobody with a CBRN gas mask and some mop gear and an M16 can go out there and break into that missile silo and survive, right? Because what's going to happen when they break in is they're going to flood the thing with all that gas, right? And then you're going to be in there choking to death, right? It doesn't matter what kind of mask you get off the market or out of the military, it won't work. The masks that they use and the suits they use are specially designed by NASA for the nuclear commands, right? And they give them to certain people, but not everybody. They give them to maintenance and not to the silo people, right? And people in the silo's gonna die if they fuck up. They are there to stay, and when they tell them to get out, they get out. And if there's a problem, they might die. And there's a huge rocket next to them that could explode, right? As well as well, what I was saying yesterday, right? And this is one of the key points. Is I was saying you put a bomb underground and then you blow it up so it does what? It's going to take the path of least resistance. If the least resistance is straight up, then yeah, it's going to go straight up, and then your warhead's going to be like the movie, a couple miles away in the ditch. Or if that rocket blows up, where else could it go? Well, it could go through the control center and back out the emergency escape, and also through the top. So there's a couple different routes. Whatever the weak points are, it's going to find them. So what you got to compare your facility to when you work in civil engineering, if you're a physicist, a mathematician, or a civil engineer, or a computer scientist trying to help, doing the modeling, you need to design a facility that's somewhat like a nuclear test facility, right? Where you have a chamber with kind of like breakaway doors. And the way to think of it is like a NBA basketball hoop, or these days they have them in high schools and colleges too, but back in the day it was just the NBA, because the guys would do the big slam dunks and they would break backboards, and it was entertaining sometimes, and people would like to do it on the clock too. They was thinking they was real clever, so they would try to break a backboard at 2-2, or break backboard or something. And there's a big brother break backboard. It would be a certain date, a certain time, and they'll break one. And people do that. It's their own little ciphers or their own little cryptography. And they send a message while they play ball. But if you don't believe me, just listen to that Michael Jackson ABC 1, 2, 3. It's a Jackson 5 song. And that's way back in the day, right in the 1970s, when the Jackson 5 was around. And they sung that song, and people just learn their ABCs in 1, 2, 3. And they associate numbers and letters sometimes that way. And you could look at a bunch of those terrorist bombings, and the Ariana Grande concert, the Pulse nightclub terrorist attack, the Brussels, Belgium attack, and the car on the Westminster Bridge attack. There's a car on the British Bridge. It was 3/22/2017, and Ariana Grande was at the exit in Manchester, M for May, M for Manchester, 2/2/2017. 1 is Ariana, 7 is G for Grande. There you go. There's a bunch of them. I won't point them all out, let you figure them out. But what I tell you is that if you want to know how to make one of those underground facilities for the county you're in, and you're the city engineer, and you're trying to evaluate whether it's a good contract or not, what you kind of need to talk to is somebody who built them for the federal, the nuclear test, nuclear test range out in Nevada test site. It's a nuclear test range, but they had an underground test range, and they had a above ground test they did out there as well. They call the whole thing Nevada test site. And some of the people who built those, probably Bechtel or whatever, Bechdel. I know they were involved in building facilities for nuclear weapons, and they probably have some civil engineers, some physicists, some mathematicians, and consultants who knew what they were doing with respect to that. And you'll want to look at a design that worked, because they blew up big bombs out there in the desert in Nevada, shook the ground, and they didn't cause huge earthquakes, knocked down skyscrapers from the earthquakes. They knew kind of what kind of ground they needed and what kind of facility to build. And one of the things I always like to think about is how I would eliminate some of the force from the weapon as it travels through those breakaway barriers, right? Now, you really can't put a backboard up there, a fiberglass backboard, but you can put a concrete barrier that has like an empty space on the other side, right? When it breaks through the concrete barrier from the force of the blast, then it has room to expand. And then it breaks through another barrier, break, and all those breakers slow the thing down, right? As the velocity slows down, the amount of force is absorbed by crushing through those breakaways, the breakaway backboards, right? And that is a design principle that is useful from what? From those backboards and other designs that were similar, right? This something that would keep something from breaking. Then you think about something that breaks to keep something else from breaking, and you've got a good engineering principle, right? And the way I look at it is you can apply that to other things. And the thing I applied it to before I applied it this way was out there on the battlefield, they train Marines, and occasionally they have SEALs who do it, who've done it, and mostly there's a lot of Marines. In boot camp, they throw little dummy grenades on the ground, and they tell you to dive on it. The LT or the LT and the SEALs do that shit to you too. And those captains in the Marines and the first lieutenants and second lieutenants in the Marines, they run around their boot camp throwing grenades on the ground, making sure the Marines are willing to do what the drill instructor told them to do. Right? They test. They say, is that guy really preparing them? Let me take this grenade out there and see if he'll really do it. And in the Army, they use them blue grenades and everything. But those Marine officers, they don't use real grenades, but they make something look real. And they want you to react as if it were the real thing. And they have a way to observe a sergeant rolling one of them things out like a terrorist, and you got to dive on it like a brave Marine is going to get a Medal of Honor. And they do that because they want you to be prepared to do that. And also they want to make sure that you're qualified for the position that they selected you for. The Marines, they don't just let you pick your job. They have to make sure you're suitable and qualified. So in boot camp, you qualify for certain things. You're either going to qualify to go to MCT or SOI. The Marine Combat Training, which is for all MOSs that are unrelated to the School of Infantry, and then the School of Infantry, which is SOI, and that's for people joining some kind of infantry MOS, right? Some kind of rockets or mortars or light infantry, you know, with the machine guns and rifles and stuff like that. But one of the things I thought of with respect to that is how could you help those guys who have to dive on a hand grenade? And you know, I always was prepared to do it myself, but never thought it was something I wanted to do, just something I would have to do at some point. But the thing I thought of when I got into engineering is how I could solve problems for people on the battlefield. And I didn't care if I made a lot of money doing it. I certainly would like to have the patent for this one. I'd like to have the credit. Stoner got the credit for creating the M16 rifle, and the one I thought of was a robot. They started building these robots, and they look like a bull to me. I'm from Texas, and when I look at it, the thing has 4 legs and it's got a huge body and it moves like a big cow or bull. And what I wanted the thing to do was to catch hand grenades. If somebody threw a hand grenade at your platoon, I wanted something to dive on it, but not the member of the platoon. And I thought of the bull. The bull has a nice big stomach, and in cows they have 4 stomachs, right? And you could load equipment into a big robot like that, or you could give it 4 stomachs, and if the grenade blows up in one stomach, instead of turning the bull into a pineapple grenade and throwing shrapnel everywhere, the force is absorbed through these breakaways in the bull's 4 stomachs, and it can poop out shrapnel out the back end if you want it to. And it can just kind of corkscrew its way out of there, and it'll spin out some of the force on the walls and some of the force downward into the corkscrew. It'll take the path of least resistance. And when I say resistance, I mean countervailing force. So it's going to take the path where there's the least countervailing forces, which is through those breakaways into chambers where it expands some more and some of the force is absorbed in that expansion. Then it hits another breakaway and takes away some more of the force. And it locks each time it travels through one of those doors. It'll close back up and it'll continue to push it towards more breakaways until all the force is absorbed. You can build some kind of robot. It doesn't have to be the bull. You know, I don't know what's the best robot for the battlefield, but you probably want to talk to the Marines, talk to those guys on the battlefield, talk to the Commandant's Warfighting Lab. If you don't know what that is, it's at Quantico Marine Corps Base, where they teach the FBI and the Marine Officer Candidate School. And talk to the people in Officer Candidate School and talk to the CO out there, and go to Parris Island in San Diego where they have Marine Corps Recruit Depot. Talk to the young Marines, talk to the officers and the drill instructors, and find out. And go out to the infantry and find out what's going to work best for them. But somebody at MIT can build that. I know Caltech and MIT can compete for a DARPA contract to do that or whatever. And somebody make a lot of money, but remember where you heard it, you know. That I didn't put in my dues so all my ideas would go to somebody who has a better opportunity to get venture capital than me, or somebody has a better opportunity to smooth talk somebody in an investment bank or something like that. But I did it for the Marines and for the SEALs and for those Rangers and Green Berets who get their life saved by some DARPA engineering. I know if you're at MIT, you're probably never going to be a platoon commander or be a SEAL team lieutenant, but you could do a world of good for those people, and a lot of you appreciate the things they do, and you would like to save somebody's life out there, and that's a noble cause. That's what I'd say. You may never have the opportunity to be a part of the Corps in the way that they are, but when you do something like that for them, you're part of the family. You know, there's Marines, officers, and anybody who figures it out is going to have a lot of respect for your engineering, and people will trust you more if you do things that benefit mankind. And believe me, the Marines do a lot of good for the world out there. That when an embassy falls, the Marines are there to pull the diplomats and consular officers out of there, hopefully. You know, there's a lot of, noise about Benghazi, and we understand its political considerations and stuff, but the Marines are there when the embassy's fallen, trying to save the ambassadors and diplomats, and the ambassadors and diplomats are critical to our foreign policy. So, hopefully it's good foreign policy, and hopefully they're supporting a good cause. Generally they are. And the Marines are there to make sure the place is safe over there. And they work with the Diplomatic Security Service. They they help countries stabilize their government sometimes, you know, promote democracy around the world in some respects. They're part of the force that that keeps the peace and promotes democracy. It's a good cause, and you know, if you believed in America on November 12th of 2001, you should still believe in us. Nothing's changed. It's just new leadership, and we have periodic elections. You know, people didn't like Nixon as the Vietnam War was going on. They didn't like Nixon, and they ignored a lot of the good things he did. One of the things, he set us on the path to getting rid of our chemical weapons. We had kept our chemical weapons and said we'll never use them, right? But we want to have them just in case someone uses them against us, and we'll use them against you. And he starts on the path to all that stuff with SALT, a Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. Is Nixon and some other engineers that helped us along the way with the chemical weapons and limiting our nuclear weapons. At one point, we had 70,000 nuclear weapons. So, I mean, you'll go study whatever you want, but I hope I could inspire somebody to learn more physics, to learn things like civil engineering, and understand what kind of applications will be real critical to homeland security, to safety, and why you need people with a lot of talent doing that instead of building web pages for pornography or something. You know, that's great. You can make a lot of money. And some people, you know, you can make pornos and have a good time. I saw this guy, what's his name? Jeremiah something. What's his name? He's the big pornographer. He was like recruiting people at Yale, and they said he could make as much money as a consultant at Accenture or something in the porn industry. And I know some girls, they go to college, and guys do, and they get their first student loan, even though they don't need a student loan, and they go have some plastic surgery, you know, liposuction, a nose job, rhinoplasty, a face job, tummy tuck, whatever they need. There's girls who have their booty enlarged. There's all, you know, whatever you want, abdominoplasty. There's all kinds of things, and they look great, right? They're not naturally looking that way, which is just fine, and some of them have a sex change with their student loan. But, you know, there's a lot better things to spend your money on. And, you know, being a porn star is not necessarily the best use of the education at MIT, Caltech, Princeton, or that, what is it, Carnegie Mellon or something like that, Duke or Georgia Tech. There's a lot better things you could do with your talent than getting rich and just, you know, exploiting other people in some respects. But God bless and Happy New Year, and I hope you can see some of the wisdom in the things I say. I've got almost 40 years of experience working in the nuclear field and with counterintelligence and nuclear weapons and engineering, physics, and math, and some chemistry. So I know you're just getting started, some of you, and some of you have been around for a while and didn't realize I had all this knowledge. The thing was, I couldn't talk about it for a long time. They put a lot of restrictions on what you're allowed to say when you work in those kind of fields. And there's a reason, you know, there's non-disclosure agreements, but there's only so much you can take, and once it's up, after so many people have exploited you for what you do know and trash your reputation, you kind of have to set the record straight. And you know, there's people run around and say I was an Army Ranger or something, you know, and that's a load of bullshit. I did go to Army Ranger school, but and then they would say I was in Army SIOPs, and no, that's bullshit too. I was in the nuclear weapons program and went to work for George H.W. Bush in the football program. And I'll tell you something, when you go into the nuclear field, you're not going to have many other options once you get so deep. Once you get the clearance and you have some work experience, you can leave the job, but you'll never leave the surveillance and monitoring. So if you stay in the military and you leave the football program, which is likely because most people don't carry the football for 8 years, they carry it for 20 minutes, for 2 days, for a week, for a month. They don't carry it for a long time. It's a stressful job. It's something you have to be prepared in a way that nobody else is prepared for. So it takes a year to prepare just to carry it one time. And you'll be part of the detail in some respects. And the chain of command goes from you as a lieutenant colonel, as a commander, something like that, to the president while you're on duty. It doesn't go through the Secretary of Defense and the JCS and your local captain. There is a White House military staff, and when you're off duty, you report to them as appropriate. But when you're on duty, it's the Secret Service and the President that you work with, and whatever he says goes. So it's a lot of people who never worked in that program, they don't understand that. And then when you leave something like that program, they want to send you somewhere, but they want to watch you. When I left working for George H.W. Bush, I ended up in Army PSYOPs. Why? Because there's a lot of counterintelligence issues in PSYOPs, right? You give somebody equipment and tell them to broadcast to the enemy. A radio and television broadcast and loudspeaker broadcast. Whatever kind of media you're using, you're talking to the enemy. And the translators are not always native English speakers because they speak real well. We want to use them. But we're worried about what? Espionage. We're worried about them broadcasting a message that tips off the enemy about our intentions. And I was in Desert Storm, and afterwards you want to do counterintelligence on the people who are involved, and you want to do counterintelligence on the people before and during the Operation Desert Shield and Storm. So you get the right people on the air, and so not somebody's going to compromise your position. So they put a Navy SEAL in that kind of unit. What are they there for? They're there to snap somebody's neck if they start saying the wrong thing on the air, and they'll bring the other translator in to finish the broadcast, right? You can't always shoot a weapon in an aircraft, and the Air Force has their volant solo. They call CNN calls it command solo or something, commando solo, and that flies around up in the air and it hacks into high frequency radios that the enemy has. And if you start saying the wrong thing and they start shooting or whatever they do, start marching towards your base, give away the position of your troops, then you're in trouble, right? It doesn't work as well. Well, this counterintelligence mission there is pretty important, and people like Navy SEALs that go over there and watch the Army, because the Army runs a lot of spies, right? And basically, we call them spies because they're not American citizens. They don't have a top secret clearance, but they're doing work that's kind of top secret, right? It's work that other people are not cleared for from their country. Like that non-foreign stuff, it doesn't always apply. And we have to make sure that the engineers and technicians don't modify the equipment in a way that would allow them to tap out a signal with like a static tapper. It taps like Morse code, but it sounds like static. It just operates in the noise band. That's the way we call it. This is you'll look at a spectrum analyzer, a frequency domain instrument. You see the noise on the bottom, and you'll see a blip come up every now and then. That's your Morse. It's where it's operating. So you might not be in the same place every time, but if you know what frequencies to look, what span to look through, it'll be there, and you just need to be able to read it. And there's people who know how to do that, and they're called spies, and that's why they send SEALs over to PSYOPs or something to watch. And I was over there, and the other reason was I was in the football program, and the plans inside the football, which is the nuclear weapons briefcase, were called SIOP, and it's not a SOP, it was a SIOP, which is a single integrated operational plan. And SIOP, when you say it, sounds like PSYOP. It's SIOP, so it's PSYOP, which is like the Army PSYOP, which is psychological operations, getting someone to surrender. So actually, yeah, I was in SIOP, but not in SIOP. I was a counterintelligence guy over there. And so a lot of people didn't know what my cover was, right? Cover was some technician over there, but I was counterintelligence, right? So I'm running around and nobody really know who I was. So it's just good because you don't want people to know. That's why they give me a magazine cover with my picture on it. It's a submarine officer. Yeah, I was a submarine officer, and that was my cover, but you know, I worked at Kings Bay in counterintelligence and security. And what do they do at Kings Bay? Nuclear weapons. They train people on Trident missiles, and they have a bunch of submarines there, and SEALs go out with the submarines sometimes. So these come from Lejeune, they put them on a submarine and take them somewhere, right? Norfolk or whatever. They fly down there and get on a submarine. The submarine can be underway, and they'll fly out to the ocean, parachute in, rendezvous with the sub. You know, you watch enough movies, you see how they do it. And anyways, yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about what I can do, and I sit there and explain a bunch of things I know how to build, and somebody would tell me, oh, he didn't ever qualify for Mensa. He didn't have a high SAT score. He couldn't have got into MIT. He's always tell me he had a 960 SAT. You know what 960 is? 9 and 6 is 15. The 15th is O. O and O. There's an O at the end, right? O and O is operations officer. That's CIA, man. He's always telling me to say I was an operations officer. That's a good cover for a SEAL too. You know, I worked in operations. And 960 wasn't my SAT. I scored 1600, and they classified it. They asked me what I wanted to do. They said, do you want to be in the newspaper with an SAT score of 1600? And I said, yeah. And they said, okay, we'll put you in a newspaper at the Pentagon, and then we'll classify it. Nobody will ever see it, and you'll get this great job. And I said, oh, really? What am I going to do? He said, you like to play with computers? And I said, yeah. He said, well, you're going to learn how to program computers and hack and do all these things, and you like the movie War Games? And I said, yeah, I love that movie. It's a great movie. Well, you're going to get to do all that. You're going to get to go to NORAD if you want to. When I was at Larry Air Force Base in the early 80s, they asked me, I want to go to NORAD. I said, no, I don't want to go to NORAD. It was right after that War Games movie, and they wanted me to fill out a clearance packet that was like fucking 5 pages long or 10 pages long or whatever. And I said, I don't want to fill that out. It's an NSQ, National Security Question. I already had a clearance. I didn't want to get another one just so I could go look at a place that I'd seen in a movie already. I was busy. I had a lot of studying to do. I was going through electronics and radiation control officers course, and also has some kind of incident response course at Lowry. And they have a nuclear incident or something like that. Well, watch the other video, EOD, and then watch this one, and you'll understand more.